Thank you very much. So the first question is, of course, the most important one, because none of you can concentrate without knowing what he did wrong. And so it was just a bike accident, biking on the bike path, and then in Aarhus, which is a very dangerous city to be biking. And then a car turned right into me, and I broke both of my arms, which is not so good for a knowledge worker, but it gave me, we discussed in the beginning, it gave me a chance to try to explore some of the text-to-X technologies that are here. So it's a very fortunate time to break both of your arms and be mobile with 2 fingers or something like that. So I'll show you some of that, the results of that. And I'll get into hyperintelligence. And we also talked about previously that I've been talking about hyperintelligence for half a decade now, and it's really now coming into the mainstream. But everyone is asking, it sounds really cool and it sounds like something we should do, but what is it? And I'll try to give you an answer throughout this talk here, because it's not so trivial, in particular because what we're trying to develop is a definition of hyperintelligence which would allow us to say that something is not hybrid intelligence, because there's so many things that you would always say there's no code or no application interface where there are no people in the loop somehow. So I hope that we can take that journey, and I will try to tell you how, well, I mean, you probably know about generative AI and how generative AI is sort of a unique time for us to be creative, and how we can foster that creativity. So in order to do that, I just want to poll you first and just see how many of you are using generative AI in your coding, which would be Copilot or ChatGPT. I guess I should have asked about who's not. Okay, so it's about 50% of you, and then how many of you have been using some of the other text-to-X? So that is text-to-image, for instance, generating images. Yeah, about a third. And how many of you have tried to generate videos? So text-to-video. Okay. A couple. So I had to think a little bit about how to present generative AI in this audience, and of course I could have just presented Copilot and the ways in which we can auto-generate code, but really I'm trying to take a different narrative in this coming 45 minutes and take you on a journey of seeing what is it that the people that you are developing applications for know and how they think, so that we can have a more systematic way maybe of incorporating in their perceptions, both their hopes of what such an interface could be if you are generating, so let's say I'm specializing to virtual assistants now. So how do we define a virtual assistant, and how do we design it in such a way that users say, I love to get that, that's going to be a revolution for my workflow, and they don't say, I am afraid of that, and I might lose my job because of that. So it's those fears and hopes that we are navigating in that I'll give a little bit of an impression with. So I'll start with a couple of perceptions of, where is this, what are the boundaries, what are the sort of the high-profile explorations of that? How many of you have not heard about Auto-GPT? Auto-GPT, just a few of you, and I'll just show, so Auto-GPT as an example of an architecture where you can have agents that generate agents.
I'd like to order a pizza.
What type of pizza would you like to order?
An 11-inch pepperoni pizza, regular crust.
Okay, great. I will first search to find a good pizza place in your area. I have found a pizza place called The Pizza. I will now create a pizza ordering bot who will call this location for you and will order your pizza.
Super amazing pizza ordering bot, reporting for duty. I have been instructed by the other AI to order you a pizza. I will now call the pizza using the Twilio voice API and order you a pizza.
So the point of it is that there's an architecture now. So in the creativity fields, we said, okay, well, there's always something for the human, because either it's sort of defining something at the end or in the beginning or at the end of a process, or some sort of task management, which is sort of that unique human contribution. And Auto-GPT and those kinds of technologies really are the answer to that, to say there's nothing which is uniquely human. And there's going to be nothing which is uniquely human, but there is a discussion now and in the coming decades about what is the most efficient way to build these interfaces. So just the fact that Auto-GPT exists does not mean that those kinds of architectures are the best way to do it. I don't know how many of you have tried to create something useful with how many of you have created something useful with Auto-GPT? So there was a lot of people who have heard about it, maybe also experimenting with it, and we've also been experimenting with it. And so far, you know, a $10,000 pizza is about the supremacy of what you can achieve with that technology. So it really shows, in principle it is there, in principle it works, or it could work, but it really doesn't, and we need to do some things.
We start with a military operator responsible for monitoring activity within Eastern Europe. They've just received an alert that military equipment is amassed in a field 30 kilometers from friendly forces. AIP leverages large language models to allow operators to quickly ask questions. Show me more details. They ask what enemy units are in the region and leverage AI to build out a likely unit formation. What enemy military unit is in the region? Our operator requests additional imagery to build a more complete picture of the potential enemy equipment on the ground. Task new imagery for this location at a resolution of 1 meter or higher. AIP surfaces the option to deploy a nearby drone to collect video. Task the MQ-9 to capture video of this location. The footage confirms a potential threat. The drone footage shows an enemy T-80 main battle tank. Generate 3 courses of action to target this enemy equipment.
So here we see the GPT sort of on steroids and saying, okay, you can control an entire war using just the chat interface and where it's heading, and where also the companies and corporations are looking at this and saying, we will also probably very soon have to turn our strategy session and our execution into a war room like this and control it. And of course, at the end of this movie, they say that they send it up the chain of the command. They have all those 3 options, and then one of them is chosen after careful deliberation. But of course, if you are, now I'm on this journey of saying, not necessarily understanding our stakeholders or our target audiences and saying the people that we are building for, it's not unlikely that they will be thinking, yes, some people are doing this chain of command, and then others are probably also going to short-circuiting, and so this technology is extremely dangerous to us and to humanity and to our workforce. And so that's what I'm be talking a little bit more about. Now, one of the sort of exciting, so those were 2 exciting trends that happened in the spring, and one of the sort of thing that really gave a lot of hope was this leaked document. I don't know if you saw that from Google, that essentially said we have no moat, and neither does OpenAI. So what they're saying is that in terms of these LLMs, then where we thought it was a winner takes it all, or the sort of the 2 first prime movers of it are going to be the first movers and the winners of this, because they have so much data and they have so much training capabilities. They are saying open source is just as efficient as us as doing this. And so that's really good news, and it really tells us that this LLM landscape is going to be much more pluralistic going forward, and that these open source strategies are going to be very efficient. And so that's something that, for instance, if you have data, then you training your separate GPT model on that, like the Bloomberg GPT, is going to be better than what Google or Microsoft can do, because you have that detailed knowledge. The approach of Meta is, as you know, probably to go entirely sort of open source on that. And Zuckerberg has been sort of, okay, how is he going to make money off of this? And the investors are asking, okay, why are you not trying to monetize on this? And I'll give you sort of on this football field over here, I'll show you sort of a little bit of a speculation. What I'm saying, this is just the entertainment part. What do I think that Mark Zuckerberg's master plan for world dominion is, even if he's giving it out as free open source? Because there's one other really interesting technology trend that's happening at the moment. So this was text to X, and we've seen lots of this. But what about the next phase of that, which is going to be thought to X? And so there's already sort of experiments where you can put an electrode in there, and then you can start to do some machine learning, and then you can start to read thoughts in this way. But what's really exciting, maybe also scaring, is that some of these researchers, medical researchers, are trying to do that also for what is called the fMRI scanners. So that means you can sit in a scanner now, you have nothing inoperated with you, but still we can start to read your mind. And now you can sort of think, okay, what is it that Mark Zuckerberg wants when he says that he wants to combine AI and machine learning and then the metaverse, well, he wants to build these sort of miniaturizing fMRI scanners into, let's say, 1 billion of these headphones, and then he'll be reading our minds in that way. So that's sort of a cool way to get lots and lots of data. And I don't know if you saw it, but Apple is also sort of putting this kinds of sensing into our AirPods. So this not just text to X, but you can say X to X is just about to come. So now the question is, generally speaking, why is it that it is happening right now? And so this is the sort of the answer to that. And you, if you've been following the field over the years, then you sort of know that we have seen now over the last, let's say, mini decade here, that a number of really important curves have crossed the line of human performance. And so that means that we now have the gates are opening to multimodality applications as the ones that we are seeing now. So what is the long-term perspective of that? Well, here's one answer to that, and that is 300 or 400 of the AI researchers that are asked the question, when is there a 50% chance that a super intelligence will be formed? And sort of the, let's say, good news for some people would be to say that there are some outliers out here who say that it's not going to happen the next couple of 100 years, but the really sobering news is that half of these experts say that within the next few decades, it is going to be there. So that's a really serious sort of debate to be had. When we're finished with this, with my talk, I'll have introduced a little bit of this hybrid intelligence notion, and I would venture to say that the majority of these AI experts don't have, let's say, state-of-the-art knowledge about the human brain and about sociology, so that I think can infect our curve, and I think that's a positive story, that line that I would come to, is that hybrid intelligence is really sort of an alternative to these questions, and I think hopefully that will become clear soon. So first of all, if you followed the IBM Developers Conference, then the CEO of IBM says no one will lose their job to AI, but they will lose their job to people who use AI. And so this blog post, I don't know if you've seen it, it's one of my favorites, is how did I lose my job overnight to a program called Midjourney, which is a text-to-image generator. And this guy, he was working in a graphics company, and he was the best of all of the people because he had the skill of finalizing, sort of putting the finishing touches on all of the things that went out. So in the same sense that you may have someone sort of who, in the code world, who will sort of put the finishing touches and knows sort of how to, let's say, put the, for instance, the error finding. And what he's then discovered was that all of his skills, the ones that he sort of made him leading, went extinct overnight, because that was exactly what Midjourney could do. And of course, his reaction could have been to say, okay, this technology comes, and it is going to enrich my life, and I can do more things. But he considered himself not as an employee, but as an artist. And if you consider yourself as an artist, and then you see your artistic sort of profession being taken away, then he left his job, and then his colleagues who said, I think this is fantastic because I can now do some things that I couldn't be doing before, are sort of the winners of the game. So those are the danger signs of losing your job, is that if you have something that you really want to do and you don't, so here's a cool book, I think, about range and sort of being able to extract knowledge from many, many different knowledge domains so that you can generalize rather than just specialize on one thing. So now I'll just walk through, in the coming 10 minutes or so, this will be sort of a little bit of a tour of what people who are not like you are interested in generative AI in terms of how it is changing their workflow. And the reason that I'm putting all of these sort of examples out there is that shapes then their impressions of the technology and how we should be building it. And so, first of all, no, let me skip that one and say, okay, so in the ChatGPT, then how many of you are using plugins in ChatGPT? Okay, so ChatGPT. So if you have the GPT Plus and then you enable the plugins, then you can pull in the PDF readers, and you can say, okay, you can get the summaries of the PDFs. You can also pull in the smart slides, for instance, and then you can have this sort of, okay, please create a slide deck summarizing these main points, and then you can download the presentations there. So those are the kinds of eye-opening things in the sort of everyday work of many of your colleagues in the different institutions. The chatbots, are really easy to train now, and so I usually have this sort of eye-opening video of it. It takes 1 minute now to train a chatbot. If you have a service like it could be chat-based or any other service, and you just have a website, and then it scripts the website, and it generates that chatbot. So it's fetching the links, and it's loading it in, and what it's doing underneath is vectorizing all of that material, and then it's good to go, and you can embed it on your website 2 minutes later. So that really shows hands-on how you can do a lot of technology with that, and how we can start to experiment with technology. Also, before we start coding, we can actually build a first prototype of this. If you were building a chatbot, then why not build sort of a Scotch tape chatbot like this one, and then start attacking it and sort of saying, okay, this is Danske Bank's, I think, one that I made for Danske Bank, and then we start to attack it and say, okay, well, what is the capital of Denmark? And then figuring out that this particular chatbot is well trained in the sense that it doesn't want to talk about the distance to the moon, but it's not so well trained in terms of the capital of Denmark. And then the main point is sort of a no-code response to that, is that every one of these chatbots then has a base prompt here, and then you can go in and then you can just add sort of into this base prompt. You can say, okay, please act as a document, and also do not answer questions about cities, for instance. And then without any coding, these people have now interrogated their technology product, and they have found errors of it, and they have implemented those error modes into a new product that they can then iterate on, and then they can go to development staff and then say, okay, now I know exactly what I want in a product. So I think that's a really great thing for sort of rapid prototyping in the sense. We went out for Nick Christiansen, for instance, and then I had a couple of guys here who had no idea about how to code, but they used all of this, and then they did sort of iterative prompt-based prompt engineering, and sort of iteration by iteration, they went out to the stakeholders, tested it out both internally and externally, and every time they only changed this base prompt, but they could increase the functionality of it step by step, and they could get sort of really positive responses, but also they could start to investigate how would this technology product be used not just as a chatbot, which fulfilled its primary and first purpose, which was to give the answers to the customers, but allowed us to start thinking more holistically about that technology and what kind of value that could be bringing. And one of the things that came out of these stakeholder discussions, where every one of us around the table, was to say, actually, it's really interesting that if we have a chatbot, then maybe we could discover trends that were different in Aarhus from Copenhagen, in which cars we really wanted to have on stock. And then if we feed that back to our purchasing department and our logistics department, then we are having what I will later on call a systems solution of AI, rather than what is called a point solution, where we just slot in a technology for a very well-defined purpose. So that shows a little bit. I also like to sort of flesh out Otter, for instance, because they're sort of a little bit first movers in terms of meetings, and so I use it for my recordings and then for the meetings, and then as soon as we start up this, we invite the Otter recorder into the meeting, then it also spawns up its bot, and that means that when my people come to the meeting, and if they are 5 minutes late, then they will just ask, okay, what was mentioned so far, and what were the tasks that were given to me? And so all of these are sort of ways in which we can see how it's integrated into the workflow of the organizations. So now I'll just advertise for, if you want to get a quick sort of overview of the field of text to image, then there's a really cool website, Fabian Marcel. He has sort of put together a timeline like this here, and I'm just sort of very quickly flicking through it, where you can see all of the different generations of technologies that are emerging, what it is that is sort of the link to it, and what is the science behind it. And so it moved as a field from, 5 years ago, we were using these big GANs, these generative adversarial networks, in order to do our generative AI, and then came sort of the Midjourney DALL-E 2. People think DALL-E 2 is outdated now because they really spent all of their energy on the chatbot instead. But then I'll go back to Firefly also. So the important thing about seeing that technology being rolled out is that it sort of goes through phases. Every one of these applications goes through failure modes that are sort of becoming a part of the narrative of saying, I don't know if you have heard or seen. So the first one here is sort of, okay, challenge number one is to really understand what is it that the text is there. And so if it's the man paints a picture of himself, and then we get these sort of odd failure modes at the early stages of a technology development. And then all of the providers say, okay, we have to fix this kind of common sense thing. And then it gets into some more subtle sort of error modes, and maybe you have sort of seen talk a few months ago just saying, I'm never afraid of these kinds of deep fakes because I just look to the hands and then there are these telltale signs. And of course, then it spawns a lot of work on that, and then this gets fixed. And then the next one is to sort of say, okay, if we really want to make use to it, then we would like to have something where we could produce some images, but also combine some text. And this is how text looked a few weeks ago, and then the new stability AI comes out with something that can actually also handle these things. That means that you can start to do logos and all these kinds of technologies. So it's really tough to be giving this kind of a talk because the one I used a month ago is completely outdated. And so I'll show you some more things that I added last night. So that means that what's happening now is that these deepfakes are there and they sort of have a real effect, and we have to start living in a world where there are some people who launch a deepfake of, for instance, the Pentagon, and they do that with one purpose, and that is that they know that the stock market is going to take sort of a millisecond dive in the second after, in sort of the time after this is released, and if you sell or buy stocks at exactly the right time, then you can game the system. So that is the new reality that we are living in, and that we have to sort of engage with. Here's one of my sort of favorite these technology companies, Adobe, and I work with them on something that I'll show you later, but really just as an illustration of what we can now do. And we can specify we don't want the surfboard, we can specify that we always were curious about what was happening on the other side of the baby swimming there, and these kinds of things. So in painting, all these technologies are moving pretty rapidly. Voice cloning is another one, and I'll show you.
Emulate the taste of like non-chicken nuggets.
Yeah, I went too far. Okay.
So these nuggets are made from chicken, but they're made to emulate the taste of non-chicken nuggets.
Dope.
Oh, that's much better.
Then edit all the blather out of your videos because my time is very precious.
Oh, that's fire.
So what this shows is just that these kinds of narratives are emerging where the workflow of people who are editing videos is going to be sort of really dramatically disrupted. If it's not that it maybe necessarily does something that you weren't able to do before. You could always do video editing, but the new thing is that you can do video editing just the way that you do text editing, and just say, look at all of this stuff, and then you just cross out whichever words you don't want, and then all of the sort of integration, you cut out that, and then the flow from frame to frame is seamlessly done using the generative AI. So it paints really a completely new picture of how we can engage with that technology. And one part is then also sort of, okay, the voice dubbing. Now I've spoken for about 20 minutes, so now you recognize all my embarrassingly Danish accent that I have, and so I trained my voice also to do this.
Following, you will hear some text that I have never gibber. I gibber uploaded 30 minutes of my voice recording and let the script overdub my voice. I can now write anything and select my voice as the speaker, or alternatively choose any other voice, male or female, and with any kind of jabber intonation.
So sorry about the words. That was because I was on the low paid tier, and then I couldn't get so much text, and then they inserted some of those. But you really can see, at least hopefully you can recognize my voice. That's about a month ago, and then the field is such that the scripts were the best ones. I tried out many of them, and then okay, so they all can do something similar. Let's say it's becoming more and more mainstream. What was really difficult a month ago is becoming something that more and more products can do. So it's really a quickly, rapidly moving thing. And what I'm trying to say with all of this is, this all shapes our expectations of what kind of products we have coming out in the very near future. Video creation is the next one that happens. Again, Runway was my favorite last month, and I've been working with that. We've been working with the municipality of Aarhus around using generative AI, where we got lots of pictures of, for instance, the town hall, and then they could use generative text to X, and then they could make changes to that, and citizens around Aarhus could then make changes to see, okay, which kinds of positive and negative visions of the future could they create, but then now you could also create videos that were sort of animations of what could be happening. And so it's really, the new thing is not that this can be done. This has been available for a long time, but it's available to the masses now, which really changes the way that this technology is taking speed. And so every one of these sort of has then different advantages. There's one which is open source, and so there's a very much of a plurality of of services that are being offered. Then the next cool thing is that we can also start to say, okay, we can, if I have some video, then if I want that video to be also available in other languages, then HiGen launched this very, very recently. So they have sort of an avatar where you can do, you have this avatar and this avatar can speak, and their specialty is lip movement and being really sort of good at integrating lip movements and doing that across different languages. And so here you can see a dubbing in different languages.
Speaking 8 languages fluently y conectar con miles de millones de personas en todo el mundo. Ora puoi farlo con l'IA. Laissez-moi vous montrer comment.
To translate a video into any language, just follow these steps. First, click the link in the description and create a free account with GenAI. Then upload your video file, then select the language you want to translate your video into. Click on the submit button and boom, you'll have a video translated into your chosen language.
Imagina 8 idiomas y conectarte con miles de millones de personas en todo.
And so an example of how quickly this moves is that it's so this technology moves so quickly that the companies themselves can't even keep track of it, because I was really frustrated when I wanted to test out this technology, and for free I could get one one recording translated, and so I picked one of me speaking Danish, and then I sent it up in the queue, and it said, you are now number 700 in the queue, you could pay, and then you could be number 1 in the queue, and I waited, and then I researched it a little bit more, and then I saw that Danish was not actually on one of the supported languages. So I was really frustrated because I couldn't even pull it out of my queue, so I had to just wait for it to come out and be worthless. And then the next morning it came out, and it turned out that they had also added Danish since then, but it just wasn't on their website. So I picked just a little bit of footage from
Kvantefysik vildt fascinerende. Ikke
bare
fordi
my previous
det
career
alt,
as a quantum physicist
er lavet af enkelte atomer, men også fordi det måske gør det muligt for os at bygge helt nye former for computere, der er mere kraftfulde end alle verdens computere.
Oops. Let me just.
Quantum physics is fascinating, not only because we and everything around us are made up of atoms, but also because it may enable us to build new computers more powerful than all the world's computers combined. It requires that we...
And so this was a little bit of a technology tester, because first of all, it's in a new language. Danish is not super supported, and I speak very, very quickly compared to what is optimal for that kind of a technology. But you can see it really is starting to work and be at least moderately convincing, and will become more and more convincing on this. So then the question was, these were sort of the individual technologies, and I just took that as a sort of a primer for what is then to come, which is building these sort of full-scale applications where we take the workflow of someone in some company, and then we say, okay, how do we develop sort of a portfolio offer that can really solve all of their tasks, or at least help them in solving all of those tasks. And customer relationship management, CRM systems are sort of one of the places where there's a lot of money to be had. And so here's Twilio, for instance.
Just a few of the ways that we see customer AI transforming your customer relationships. Customer AI connects the dots for your marketers, pulling data from every prior interaction a customer has had with your company, and then personalizing each and every message, and finding the right people for every campaign with generative audiences, automatically bringing together the right people for the right message.
So the point of it is really to say, okay, everything that the marketers were doing, or that the support ticket responsible people were doing, is something that can now be incorporated into a flow, and Salesforce has the same sort of convincing sales story, and it's all contact them if you want to be sort of a part of it. The point that I want to make here is that, well, I'll show you in the next video. This is Adobe that we are working with, and what we're working with Adobe on is not generating necessarily the core product itself, but the virtual assistant around it, because there's a lot of different kinds of interactions that can be pulled in, and the more comprehensive it goes into the workflow of the people, the more we have to think about what their perceptions are. And I'll show you some examples of it, but this is the omni-channel sort of product design.
There's no limit to how much you can delight your customers. People want more, faster than ever, and it's got to be personal. But creating personal experiences across every customer, market, channel, and device, that's been more than any marketer or even a whole team could handle. But with Adobe Experience Manager, you can. Marketing has gone from manual to semi-automated in a matter of years, but that's just not enough if you want to connect with every customer one-on-one. Thankfully, technology is accelerating faster than ever, and with Adobe, you unlock the power of automation and can do things that just weren't possible before, like
So what you can see is that these companies who have a lot of data and who have a customer base are now saying, okay, they're sort of fighting for the same territory, but Adobe, for instance, comes from the creative side and says, here's now integration into how you do all of the products and all of the material, whereas Twilio comes from the opposite end and says, here's the ticket and the handling and the data science around it that they have usually done. And so then they try to generate these sort of 360-degree solutions that you have. So now for the remaining part, sorry, I still haven't sort of told you about hyper intelligence yet, but that's exactly what sort of will be the topic of the last parts. And so the point of departure of that is that BCG and McKinsey are also saying, starting now to say that this kind of hyper intelligence, or everyone is talking about human AI teams and how human AI teams are a very precise number, 6 times more likely to amplify AI success, for instance. So that's what they are talking about. But as I talked about in the beginning, it really is not very discriminative to say what is then a hyper intelligence, or what is a human-centered solution and what is not. What is human in the loop and what doesn't count as human in the loop. And I've been somewhat combative with some of the human-centered AI researchers, because I am of the opinion that we can actually formulate a set of principles that can ensure that an application, let's call it hyper intelligence application, is used for good purposes, and not necessarily, as many sort of computer scientists of my colleagues say, that the algorithm is just a hammer and we have absolutely no control about what the hammer is being used for. And the price that you have to pay for that is that you have to treat it as more than a code. And so for me, AI is a piece of code, and there's a risk of failure to deliver value. There's a very high risk of employee de-skilling. And also, if you sort of use AI and you're a minor company, you say, we want to be data-driven, then there's also a risk that someone else, like Google or something like that, has more data than you, and then they can train a data-driven, you can say, value mechanism more efficiently than you can. And that's why more and more companies are coming and saying, okay, how can we generate value in a new way that is not as, let's say, focused on just the reliance on AI, but is something that we can integrate all stakeholders around technology development, something that guarantees upskilling of employees, and also very importantly, I'll show you one example, a couple of examples of it, how, well actually I showed you the chatbot, how that technology development, if the technology development happened simultaneously where all of the stakeholders could see the product and in its making, then you could also start to imagine how that could generate new value in completely new ways, how we could transform our organization while we are creating the technology and not, let's say, afterwards, to adapt to it. So what we're trying to do is that we're trying to formulate a field of hyper intelligence that lies at the intersection between the algorithmics, the interface, the human-computer interaction, and then all of the management principles that sort of have also been researched for a long time. And we're trying to develop a set of principles, and here's sort of a set of principles that we are marketing out. So for my TED talk, we had this small red circle that we had to stay in. So and it was really hard for me. I was always almost stepping out of that. I'm actually the only one, I think, in the world who has given a TED talk with only one shoe, and so you have to see it if you want to see why. So here's an example of how hyperintelligence is different than AI, and that is that we are introducing something that we call a hyperintelligence pact between management and the employees, which means we are saying the purpose, the foundational purpose of this technology development and how its success is evaluated is whether it creates employee upskilling. It's not something that we are lucky and we're trying to do, it's actually something that we are aiming to do. And what happens when we do that is that then the employees have this psychological safe space, which means that when we start to engage with them, we did a study with Autodesk and some architects I'll talk about later, then they open up much more, and you get these sort of foundational, both the pain points and the desires and the wishes of of the end users that you get in. So there's sort of three different, I sort of think of AI and human-centered AI as the human exoskeleton. So we can use AI to make every one of us better, but the hyperintelligence includes both the human exoskeleton and then an organizational exoskeleton. So that is, there are some principles on how an organization should be reforming and refining itself, let's say disrupting itself. So just very briefly, one of the things to understand is really what are these new emergent job roles in the age of generative AI that we should be designing for and designing support for. And one of the roles that is not there is the London cabbie, because it took 2 years to become a London cabbie, because you had to study for a test in which you had to be able to answer the question, what is the fastest route from A to B at any given time in London? And so this is what, in this framework here, we would characterize as an entirely prediction task. And if you rely on an entirely prediction task, then you are up for an algorithmic disruption. Whereas normal tasks are sort of a mixture between prediction and judgment, and we really are not accustomed to thinking about it and disentangling those two. But if we want to make optimal use of AI solutions, then we have to disentangle those two and say, okay, for that part of the workflow, we can use prediction and we can slot in, and then we have to spend increasingly more of time on value generation in the judgment part. And so here's an example of radiologists, and radiologists were by Jeffrey Hinton. He said in 2015, we don't need to train any more radiologists. And of course, he was completely wrong. And the reason that he was wrong was, yes, we have crossed that curve where we can now start to, at least under some circumstances, do the image detection here at human level. But if you take a look at what the radiology does, then there's a list of 30 different tasks that person is doing. And only one of them was something that had something to do with something that could be algorithmically replaced. Another example of why algorithmic job replacement is not as sort of evident as possible is, what do you think would happen if we had self-driving cars and we put them in a school bus? So what would we have to do the minute after we had fired the bus driver? Call the ambulance. Yes, exactly. Or hire a kindergarten teacher because there was, these screamy children cannot be left alone, and the school bus driver was actually maintaining another role that we were not so explicitly aware of, but we will really be aware of it when it falls out. And that's going to happen in many of these different, if we don't consider them explicitly. Another, I think, more forward-going looking sort of example is the job of a meteorologist, which used to be a computational person. So you get a computational person in who does all the calculations they can, and then they go on the news, and then they present the best predictions that they can make. But now the job of a meteorologist is much, much different, because state-of-the-art algorithms can do these predictions, and they can even do them so that we can start to put percentage on the risk of a tornado, which means that it's no longer just calculating those 5% or whether it's 7 or 10, but the role of a meteorologist is now to be communicating with all the different stakeholders and knowing how would the citizens of this American city respond if we communicated in various different ways, and how many people would actually die if we communicated in the wrong way and it was a 5% risk happening. So this shows how when we start to disentangle this prediction and judgment in our job roles, that we can completely new workflows that are arising from that. And in general, this is what we will have to start getting good at is, for instance, creative writing. We shouldn't just say, okay, ChatGPT is now there, so that is the death of writing, but we should really be able to recognize what are all the different phases that we go through, for instance, in writing, and more generally speaking, in any creative or even non-creative task. Then there's sort of, here's, for instance, 8 different tasks that we go through, and we need to build systems to support all of them, but not to augment various different ones, and not to take over all of them. So here is finally sort of one of the examples that where they have really managed to create what I would call a hybrid intelligence corporate solution. And the way that they did it was that they had a mail order company which worked like Amazon but not like Amazon, so that you had a subscription model and they just sent you 5 clothing offers every month, for instance. And of course, if you were data-driven, then what would you do? You would sort of do the calculations, and then you would know that the items that are most likely to have retention are socks and underwear and then white T-shirts, right? And so you would send those. And they tried to disrupt that model and instead say that they hired 1,000 personal stylists. So these are now the experts, and their aim was to create a product offering for every individual. And the only way they could do that is by having these personal stylists, but then also taking everything else in their operations and making it completely sort of datafied. And you can, if you want to, you can sort of search for, they have a website where they show the whole data process and how their logistics is even more efficient than Amazon's is, because Amazon tried to do this. They took a patent on something similar to this, and they failed to do it because when they get their parcels back, then they often throw them out. And so, of course, if you try to do this new kind of mail order service and you throw out the parcels when they come back, then you have a lot of value loss in that process. Well, let me just skip the prompt engineering in the interest of time, and then just talk about this development and how I think that this development should be happening. And I'll just talk about a little bit about how there is now a conflict in computer science between approaches that are sort of moving from human in the loop to human on the loop to human out of the loop, and then the response of that, which is this field that is called human-centered AI. And what the people, so how many of you are aware about human-centered AI as the principles? So they tried to get a billion euros from the flagship and become a EU flagship, but they didn't manage to do that completely. So instead, they became just a network, and there's something called the Humane AI Network. And one of the founding principles of this human-centered AI approach is that there's a dilemma in design, or usually a dilemma in design, which is when you want to do something that automates very efficiently, then you have to choose whether you have high degree of automation or high degree of user control. And what this entire sort of subfield of AI inspired by HCI is saying is that you can actually strive to achieve both of them in your applications. And you should actually, when you have an application that has, let's say, generative AI inside of it, you have to design generative AI in such a way that the user always feels in control. And so here's an example of sort of a rubric of how you can try to move more and more towards, in this case here, patient-guided and clinician-monitored systems. So in every application, you can really think about what is it that gives the user a sense of control of the process or of the output that is happening in that way. And we sort of place hybrid intelligence somewhat in the middle because it is human-centered as such, but then one of the basic foundational principles of this approach is also just to take AI and consider it a tool. So that means, which is good, so you don't sort of exaggerate the importance of it, but you also fail to sometimes reimagine the workflows that could be changed compared to a purely human one that is just augmented, and then a human AI workflow doesn't necessarily need to be the same as it was before, and that's where there's potential of disruption. And if you want, we can have the slides, but there are some very, very specific design recommendations related to this golden rules of this HCI pattern languages that you could be following. But the algorithms underlying it is sort of, okay, something like interactive reinforcement learning, interactive machine learning, inverse reinforcement learning, these kinds of algorithms that were also used to train the GPT models that have a human in the loop in the training of that. And so now here is my, take-home message, technical delivery of my take-home message, which is when you want to train these virtual assistants, there are a number of success criteria that were not there before. So basically, we used to say that we design a system. This is coming out of information systems management, where you are designing a system, and then what you're designing for is the willingness to adopt the product that you had. And this is just completely outdated if you are designing a system that is going to be disruptive in terms of a knowledge workflow that you have. Then we've been working with Autodesk around creating a generative AI for engineering and for architects. And what we're showing over here is that there's actually 3 different design criteria that you should be including in your approach. And that is the willingness to adopt, but also the willingness to co-develop, which means that you have to consider what are the settings that I can have around my development process that makes my, let's say, focus group as eager to bring up ideas about what the end product could look like. And one of the examples I'll show in just a second now. And then the last one is also to say that these kinds of virtual assistants, they only gain the sort of the true potential if you as a user invest enough time in order to personalize it and in order to train it. So we really need to sort of think about what are the conditions that we can have for that. And so we've been running some sort of technical research, A/B testing, where we have a product that is developed, this is business intelligence, with a AI narrative and with a hybrid intelligence narrative. And what we show is that the engagement that we get just by phrasing the entire process as a hybrid intelligence process creates this psychological safety and the willingness to engage in the process and open up and reimagine your workflow. So I think that's something completely new and really exciting. Finally, I just want to touch upon how we could be designing for upskilling and what would happen when we do upskill our employees. And so I'll show just one example here where we had a project together with a company called eSoft, and with eSoft we, let me just double check, yeah. With eSoft, they have 50% of the Danish market for putting houses on sale. They send a photographer out. The photographer takes 3 of these pictures here, and then these pictures, exposures, are being sent to Vietnam, and then they have a processing unit where they do blue sky correction and all kinds of things that the algorithms couldn't do. So this company had a project with some computer scientists from DTU, and they very quickly sort of harvested a 40% efficiency enhancement of this process by just including AI. And then they asked us to say, okay, what would it look like if we now put hybrid intelligence methodologies into this? And the way that we work with them is then that, well, first of all, we built something called a benefit dependency network, which is either starting from the IT enablers or the investment objectives, you go back. And the really interesting thing about this, forget about it, it really looks impressive when it's on a big screen, that's cool. But here you can see that, that out of it emerges sort of what we see as a low road, which is use AI to automate standard edits and increase editors' time on this. And so that's the low road of just enhancing your efficiency. And then there's a high road here, which is about increasing the skills of the editors. And then the question is, what could we do if we increased the skill of the editors and then we gave them more time for non-trivial tasks? And the way that we find out that is that we do interviews then with both the editors themselves, and we say, what is it that's most difficult in your workflow? What is it that is most challenging? What is it that's most fun? What would you like to spend more time on? And then we also talk to the marketing division, and then we ask them, what is it that you had always loved to be able to sell, but you never had the capabilities sort of organizationally to do it? And what came out of this here was that we could build what we call a mass customization of these services now. Instead of saying that this is a production line where we do the same for every customer, then we do what the Stitch Fix case did, and we say, what if we tell the customers that they can write down 5 words about what characterizes your house, and then these 5 words are translated to Vietnamese, and then they are sent to the editors, and now the editors are not production line doing the same thing, repetitive task again and again. Every task that they do involves a human judgment of what do they actually mean when they say that my house is warm. And then they do something which was crazy before. They overexpose instead of underexpose their images, and then they get this glowing feeling out. And so that's one of the illustrations of how we could sort of go through and think of a technology development process in a holistic perspective and think of it with all of the stakeholders included, not just about how we create better products, but how we create better and more productive people, but also how we change organizationally the way that we deliver value in companies. So that's what we are trying to push. And we're trying to put together sort of a pact or something like that. I'm trying to do a Svanemærke kind of thing in Denmark, where it's where you can get a brand of hybrid intelligence if you follow a certain set of principles. And we would like to develop those principles together with you. And then maybe in the coming year or two, we could have sort of like an export success of taking those principles and then going global with them. And that would be an amazing journey to be with you. So reach out to me if you're interested in something like that. Thank you.